First, we'll look at a rounding video made by 2 grade 5 students this year. And they did rounding to the nearest tens. So if you took 698 and round to the tens, they said it rounds to 700, and this is why. It's important to think about what are the numbers between. So 698 is between 600 and 700. And I really like that they put the middle, because that halfway point is going to determine are we rounding down or rounding up. So they accurately put in the middle of 600 and 700 where 650 was, and then they estimated that 698 would be much closer to the 700 end. If you had something like 660, you might put the mark there. Rounding to the nearest hundred, and they took the number 555 and they say it rounds to 600. And this time they've looked at the ones column or the tens column and looked at what the number was. So 555. So we'll go back and we'll look at that. So they had 555 and they wanted to round to the hundreds. So we know rounding to the hundreds means we need to look at the column to the right of it. So if we have 500 and 600 and the halfway point is 550, well, right in between it, well, not in between, but right next to it is that 555. So it's still going to round. 555 rounds to 600 because the 5, as they were saying, is 5 or greater. And it's going to round the 5 up to a 6 to 600. So let's look at if we have 3,429, and we're still going to round to the hundreds. So we are rounding to the 100 spot. We're going to look at the tens column, and 3,400, and the next 100 up would be 3,500. Okay, and again, if I had a 1 in front of here, so if it was 13,400, 13,500, it doesn't matter how many spots are in front of it, even if there's something in the millions. It's the hundreds that we're counting by, and we're seeing how close the numbers afterwards are to which hundred, if it's closer to 400 or closer to 500. So here we have 450. Well, we know the 2 is less than 5. We know it's less than the halfway mark. So this is going to round down to the 400. So if it was 13,400. What if we have some decimals? So if we have 429 and 82 hundredths. So remember, we have the hundreds, the tens, the ones, the tenths, and the hundredths, place values. And let's say we're going to round to the ones. We need to look at the place value that's to the right of it. So we're going to look at the tenths. This is 5 or larger, so it's going to round up. But again, let's count by ones. So if we had 429, so 429, the next ones up would be 430. The middle of that would be 429.5, because the halfway between 29 and 30 would be 29.5. And we have decimal 82, so 429.82 is going to be about there, let's say, which is much closer to the 430. So this is going to round to 430. Well, what if we wanted to round to the tenths? So we have 429.82. And sorry, I'm just going to go back and correct this one. We're going to put the decimal 0 at the end to show that it is a rounded number. and that there were decimals afterwards, and you're showing that those have now rounded off to zeros. Okay, so back to the blue here. 429 and 82 hundredths. We're going to round to the tenths, and that means we have to look at the hundredths. So we have 429 and 8 tenths, and then the next one would be 429 and 9 tenths. Well, the halfway point, and I'm just going to write the decimal part for easy's sake, 8.5 is between decimal 8 and decimal 9. So if we looked at each of these as decimal 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, 8.5, 8.6, 8.7, 8.9, and then 8.9 would become decimal 9.0 like we have there. So 8.2 is right here, which means it's going to round down, and our rounded number would be 429 and 8 tenths. Okay, you can put the 0 there to show that you've rounded off extra digits or rounded down extra digits. And our last two quickly. So if we looked at 42,687 and 96 hundredths, and let's round to the thousands place. So we're going to look to the right of it, and we need to see what the hundredths tells us to do. So if we were looking at what's this between, we're looking at between 42,000 and 43,000, and the halfway point being 42,500. Well, we know that 600 is past the halfway point, so the 6 is rounding the 4 up, and we would round this up to 43,000. And this is where a lot of students are still writing that decimal part. The decimal is still part of this whole number, so everything is getting rounded off using zeros, showing that this number is about 43,000. Now here, if we were rounding to the hundredths spot, we have to look at the tens and see what the 10 tells it to do. Well, this number is going to be between 82,900, and what's after 900 would be 1,000, but we can't write 82,000 1,000. We carry that 1,000 over, and it's going to become 83,000. So again, if you think about it as counting by hundreds, you'd have 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000. So this number is between 82,900 and 83,000. The halfway point being 82,950, and it's much closer to the next 1,000. So this is going to round up to 83,000. Decimal 0, and again, everything after these rounded numbers is being replaced by the zeros because we're rounding it off. In summary, you have to think about what are you rounding to, hundreds or thousands, and skip count by that much. So if you're counting by hundreds, 100, 200, or if you're counting by thousands, 1,000, 2,000s, or 10,000s, and then think about what's the middle of those two numbers that you're skip counting by, and is your number that's being rounded closer to the first half or closer to the second half. The other way to summarize it up is thinking about all the place values. If you're rounding to the hundreds, you're always going to look to the right at the tens, and if it is 5 or higher, you're going to round that hundreds place up. If it is between 0 and 4, you're going to leave it alone, and everything else goes to zeros. If you were to look at the 10,000s, you look to the right and look at thousands.